Noam Chomsky spent 60 years teaching us about how the elites manufacture our reality. He showed us the invisible thread between media, money, and power, but there's a final chapter to his story that he didn't write, and unfortunately, it's the most uncomfortable one. It's a story of how the world's greatest critic of elite power networks became a node within one of the vilest ones. Today we have to ask, is it possible to truly expose the system while the system is picking up the check? Even worse, can our heroes become just as bad as the worst criminals? To be clear, this is purely speculation, and it is alleged, and it's not confirmed, but it is based on what has been coming out with these files. When we watch the news, we're used to the villains being corrupt and evil, but we're not so used to seeing the critics or the people that we look up to, the heroes, being just as compromised. And if the system manufactures consent, what does it mean when the person who told us that is inside the system's social circles? Noam Chomsky told us that the world was run by powerful people who manipulate the stories that we hear and the information that we receive. And yet, he was actually a part of that. He was in that system. He was a part of the group that was manipulating what we were seeing. And Chomsky wasn't just a linguist. That's what he's famous for in the first place. But he was actually the intellectual face of dissidents. He was a hero of opposition. I remember in the early days of the internet, I used to watch Noam Chomsky talk about all the bad things that the heroes were doing in the world, and I used to believe it. I used to think that he was speaking truth to power. But now, it's a little bit hard to know if he actually meant what he was saying. He argued that corporate interests align with political power. Corporations didn't necessarily work with the government. They just saw or aligned with what the government was trying to accomplish, and they were on the same page because they both profited off of it. And because of their sort of connection to the media, then they were able to influence the stories that were being told to the people. Think tanks receive funding from corporations. They gain alignment or agreements on what's expected, and they work together in spreading that message and spreading that word. Chomsky suggested that his role as this public intellectual was to expose that information so that regular people could understand what was going on, so they could see how the system really operated. Chomsky argued that there were no smoky back rooms where people were conspiring on making plans on how to rule the world. He just said that it was just policies and aligned interests. And then all these people who belonged to the government or to these corporations, they were on the same page. They wanted the same things. And so they just worked towards those same goals. They didn't decide to do it. They didn't talk about it in secret. It just worked out that way because they wanted the same things and they had the power to accomplish it. And he was very critical of American foreign policy. But he also was a little bit optimistic about America because America is a democracy, and so there is this possibility that the people could influence the direction of the government if they were aware of what was going on. Yet, slightly contradictory to this, he saw both parties as functioning as business parties. Both political parties, while on opposite sides or claiming to be on opposite sides, were really on the side of business. They were really on the side of ensuring the economic dominance of the United States of America. And he supported democratic controls of capital. So he wasn't a communist. He didn't talk about communist reforms, but he did think that there should be some democracy in the way that funds were spent, in a way that people actually understood the problems that were happening or the problems that need to be solved with money, and then they could vote or they could choose together what was the best solution. And while he was doing all this talking and telling all these stories, he kind of positioned himself as someone who was outside of that elite corruption. I guess he never explicitly said that, but it was always kind of implied by the way that he spoke about these problems. But then recently, with the Epstein files, it's been exposed that he had a relationship with Epstein, and he was a part of the social networks or the network that Epstein was a part of. And the worst thing about Noam Chomsky's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was that they became friends after the conviction, after Epstein had spent time in prison. And so there was no denying that Noam knew what Epstein was all about. It was in the news. There was evidence of it. It wasn't like it was a secret. He knew what the deal was. Yet they became friends. They were friendly. And as proof of this sort of strong relationship, Noam Chomsky in 2017 or later wrote a letter of support, like a reference letter to support Jeffrey Epstein, and he said that he was a highly valued friend. There's even some emails that Noam Chomsky provided Epstein with some advice about how to ignore the criticism that he was getting for his previous crimes. He just didn't even need to address them, just pretend they didn't happen and ignore them. And this is the understanding and knowing what Epstein had done. There was even some suggestion that Chomsky was sort of negating or denying the claims against Epstein. And so there's definitely questions about Chomsky's evaluation of Epstein as a person. In 2016, there was an invitation from Epstein to Chomsky and his wife to come and visit. Chomsky's reply was that his wife likes New York and wants to visit in New York, but Chomsky himself was fantasizing about the Caribbean island. I'm not exactly sure what Chomsky knew about what was happening there, but he definitely was interested in going there. And I imagine that in these sort of elite circles of people knew or had an idea of some of the things that were happening there. It probably wasn't a complete secret. Noam Chomsky received around $270,000 from an account related to Jeffrey Epstein. Noam claims that this money had nothing to do with Epstein. It was just Epstein that helped him get it back. If this was a corporation and Chomsky was doing an analysis of it, he would call this the structural alignment. So why did he think that he was immune? Why did he think it was okay to be doing business? Even if he didn't receive the money from Epstein, it doesn't look very good that the money came from Epstein. And why was his finances, or why were their finances mixed together that way? And more recently, when this information came out, Noam Chomsky's wife framed all of this as a grave mistake. She said that they had no idea what was going on. They weren't aware of all this bad stuff. But if you look back, they became friends after the conviction, after the jail time. So there's no way that they couldn't have known the kinds of things that Jeffrey Epstein was up to. Now, if you love Chomsky, you're looking for an excuse why this happened. If you hate him, then you're looking for the smoking gun. But both of these are kind of distractions from the real horror, from the real problem, the real difficulty of this whole story. Because Chomsky argued that elites protect each other through networks of influence. They use their power to help each other out. The revolving door between corporations and the government. There's the shared social and educational pedigree. These people are in the same groups. They might have grown up in the same kind of environments, the same areas where there was lots of wealth. They went to elite universities. And so there's this sort of shared connection and shared value between these people. People who belong to the same group, they want people within that group to succeed. They want people within that group to live good lives. They don't want them to be punished. They don't want them to go to jail. And it's not necessarily that they're evil. It's just that this is the people that they share something with, that they have something in common with them. It's just like you and your friends. You want good things to happen to your friends. You don't want your friends to get in trouble. The scale of this is different, obviously, for us regular people and those elites who are flying around the world in their private jets and living on islands. The degree to which their bad behaviors can affect the world are certainly different than ours, but we all kind of want the same thing from the people around us. We want them to live good lives. We want them to be happy. Also, part of this sort of shared reality in that these people who are sort of in the same social class, the upper elite social class, they've gone to the elite universities, they have a connection, or they have connections either economically or socially to people in the media. And so there's this attempt to use the media as a filter, as a control system for the information that people get access to, because they don't want to expose the bad things that are happening. They want to keep the stories positive, an incentive for them not to rock the boat, not to cause problems, not to get their friends in trouble. And the thing is that Epstein clearly operated within these elite networks. And Chomsky was a part of that network. Rather than looking at Chomsky as a villain, we should ask, how did this elite network function? And how did Chomsky become a part of it? Was it simply because he was famous? Because he was at least perceived to have some power, that he just got sucked into this group? And the other side of this is an intentional conspiracy. Were these people intentionally working together, or they were close to each other? Once you become a part of a certain group, then you get told the stories about what that group wants, about what's good for that group, and they had sort of status alignment. In some ways, some of these emails do suggest there was definitely some conspiring, especially when there's information about bailouts coming out. There was certainly some weird strangeness about some of the documents that are missing. Chomsky was seen as this rebel, as this dissident, as this person who was fighting this power. And you would think that if he had those strong opinions, if he was sort of spreading this word, writing these books, telling people about this, you would think that he would be able to avoid this. But at the same time, it doesn't look like he was able to avoid it. He still got sucked in, just like anyone else would. Chomsky didn't just join a conspiracy. He joined a social circle. And in the world's 1% of the 1%, conspiracy and social circle are kind of indistinguishable. Chomsky was, for a while, seemingly like a top intellectual. He was kind of a little bit dense for most people, but he was the kind of person who you would look at and say, well, that person really knows what's going on. He's got a good sense of reality. He's telling us the truth. And at the same time, that brings a certain level of power, that brings a certain level of authority, and that also puts him sort of in the public sphere. And maybe the fact that he had so much influence over people is why he wanted in that group, why he might want to join that group, or why people might want him to join that group. And people sort of treat Chomsky as a hero. They thought that maybe he was morally immune to something like this. But the Epstein connection really disrupts this immunity. It really shows that even someone like Chomsky, who seems to be suggesting he's one thing, can be a totally different thing in the background or in secret. Maybe his criticism of power wasn't a dislike for it. Maybe it was a desire for it. He wanted to be powerful. He wanted to be a part of the community. There was something about being part of this group that was good, that people wanted to be a part of. And this whole event creates a psychological shock because we thought that Chomsky was fighting against this, but through his fight, he became a part of it. And it's not that he's evil necessarily, though he might have been. He got sucked into this. He became a part of it, and he wanted to be a part of it. And this really isn't just about Chomsky either. Instead, it's about the power ecosystem. It's how these power systems work, how these groups work. Because we see in some of these emails that there were connections between people. People were being introduced to other people. And so when you get introduced to someone, there's value to that. There's power in that. And it's also like an asset. If someone is trying to accomplish something, there's certain people who can help them. There's certain elite people who have the ability, the authority, or the power to make those things happen. In a way, Chomsky shows that he was an asset. He was a valuable person in some way, and that people of power wanted to be connected to him. They wanted to be near to him. It even sort of muddies the waters, like what were his motivations all the time? And one thing I think about this too is that maybe the whole Epstein thing was a little bit of a psyops, in the sense that maybe Chomsky and Jeffrey Epstein were just friends and there was nothing fishy going on. And maybe the fact that they were associated and these emails have been released is like a way to make us give up, to make us feel like we can't believe in anyone, we can't trust anyone. And maybe that could be a part of what was happening here and why these files were released, because it kind of muddies the water. It poisons the well. It makes it difficult for us to trust these people who we didn't think were bad people, like Noam Chomsky and others. The whole idea of manufacturing consent described structural alignment with corporations, with government, and with people of power. And the Epstein files, or the Epstein case, shows how structural alignment can also operate socially. So not just within institutions, not just within organizations, but also socially, between people. We tend to think of organizations being powerful, but there are certain people in the world who are extremely powerful, who control corporations, who control organizations, and having them working together can actually have big consequences. When someone critiques power, do we assume that they are outside of it? Or do we have to understand that the critique can exist or must exist within those social networks that they're critiquing? It's not just the outside looking in, it's actually from the inside looking out, or from the inside looking around. It's easy to be a moral person if you have no power, you have no authority. But maybe once you gain power, maybe once you become part of the elites, then you become corruptible. As has been said many times before, power corrupts. And kind of distilling this all down, Chomsky argued against secret conspiracy narratives. While the Epstein case doesn't exactly prove conspiracies, it does show that elite worlds are smaller than we think. And maybe an unsettling takeaway from this isn't that everyone is evil. Instead, maybe once someone has reached a certain level of power or authority, they get pulled into these sorts of networks. One of the questions, or one of the things that comes to mind with this, is that Chomsky was related to this in the later parts of the 2000s, but maybe he was involved with other groups before with similar power, similar structure, similar things. In Chomsky's case, maybe this isn't new. Maybe this isn't his first sort of elite group. Maybe he was a part of another elite group or the same elite group in the past, and we're just becoming aware of the one that's happening right now, of the sort of new thing. One of Chomsky's greatest contributions was the idea that you don't need a secret room full of men smoking cigarettes to control the population. You just need aligned interests, similar wants. But the tragedy of his connection to Epstein isn't that it proves Chomsky was evil. It's that it proves his own theory was right. It shows that elite power networks are so dense, so gravity heavy, that they can pull in even their harshest critics. And if the man who wrote the manual on how to stay awake was himself lulled into the social comforts of power, what hope is there for the rest of us? Maybe the real red pill isn't discovering that everyone is evil. Maybe it's realizing that outside the system is a place that doesn't actually exist if you have any sense of power or influence. Because once you become influential enough to challenge the sun, you're already close enough to get burnt. If you like this video, you may enjoy my book. It's about dreams, alternative realities, and the risk of opening Pandora's box. Check it out in the link in the description.